guys, it's Gary here, and I'm going to talk through a little bit about my in-ear mix, how I set things where I set them, and why I do what I do. So I've had some of our volunteers ask for my mix to start with in the past, and for the most part, I've heard good results. I don't think my mix is perfect for everyone by any means, but hopefully in this video you can learn a few of the concepts that I use to set things where I like to set them. So my basic ideology behind my mix is simple. I like my mix to sound like a recording with my own stuff boosted a little bit so that I can critique and hear them a little bit more. So when it comes to panning and EQing and volume balance and things like that, I want it to sound as, I guess, professionally mixed as possible, but still hear my stuff a little bit. So let's talk through how I arrive at that spot. We're going to be talking today through volume, reverb, panning, and EQ. And the most basic thing I want you to grab on why we do any of this stuff is because while the sound team does this at the soundboard for our congregation and our online viewers to hear, none of the things that they do, besides one that I'll talk about just in one sec, none of those changes that they make affect how we perceive the audio at all. So if they have a vocal and it's way too like muddy and they need to make it sound more clear and have more clarity, bring up the highs maybe, they're going to do that on the soundboard, but we will not hear that change at all. So I'm doing all these things on this unit as if I was mixing sound for myself on a soundboard or on a computer or something like that. So that's why I'm arriving at all these things. The one thing I did want you to understand though is that when the sound team changes our level of gain, which is kind of just this master level of volume that's being sent to everywhere, we will hear that. So for instance, if I'm a vocalist and I sing really quietly versus a vocalist who sings really loudly, the level of gain that the sound team is going to have is going to be a louder level of gain for the quieter singer and a quieter level of gain for the louder singer, so that the perceived volume of those two sources is similar. Or you could think of it, if you're an instrumentalist, the level of a snare drum is a lot louder than the level of, let's say, a bass guitar, for instance, right? Snare drum is really acoustically loud. Bass guitar is really quiet and needs a lot of amplification to it. That's what gain's going to do. So the reason I say that is if you have your volume on a channel kind of where you know you'd want it, but it's way too loud or way too quiet, it's probably because the gain at the soundboard isn't properly set yet. Let them do that. They'll get it figured out. One thing I'd encourage you if you're an instrumentalist or vocalist is when you're sound checking, sing or play at the level that you're going to be singing in service so that you don't surprise the sound team with anything a lot quieter or a lot louder in service. That'll help you and also them get a more consistent level of where your volume should be, and you'll be happy with it more consistently. So let's walk through a mix. We're going to go in order of the top row and then through the bottom row left to right. So here's how I set things and why I set them. So let's start with our kick drum. All right, basic mixing 101. There's about 4 things that I would never ever pan. Those things are kick, snare, the lead vocalist on a song, and bass guitar. For me, those are always straight up center. They're kind of the foundation of my mix. So let's walk through some of these dials. I never put any reverb on kick. You can. It sounds dumb. Don't do it. No reverb on kick is what I do. Like I mentioned, I leave it centered for the panning. Volume, I won't get into a lot about volume specifically. It's kind of a taste thing. I like a lot of kick. Let's go through our EQ. I found that the way to get the kick sounding the most mix ready for me is to do some crazy things with my EQ. I turn the highs all the way up. I turn the mids all the way down, and I'm cutting that frequency. Well, I don't even know what that is. Probably 500 hertz or something like that. I'm cutting that frequency all the way, and I'm turning the lows almost all the way up. That for me is a good kick drum sound for how we've got it mic'd with my in-ears. Let's move on to the snare drum. All right, let's start with an EQ. I tend to boost the top end a little bit to add some sizzle. I want to just get a little bit of crack happening with it. The mid-range changes based on kind of week to week. This is going to be the foundational like thump of the snare. I'll have it anywhere from here to cutting some of the beef to over here to adding some of it. Just kind of depends on how it's sounding that week. All right. Mid frequency never changes. For me, that's kind of where the fundamental tone of the snare drum lives, is 930-ish. What I'll do to find it is I'll boost, sweep around, listen for when that tone kind of comes in, and now I found it, and now I can choose to, cut some of it, boost some of it, leave it neutral. Anyways, that's what I like doing with it. I don't do anything with the lows on the snare drum, just leave it flat. You can cut it, you can boost it. Probably not gonna make a huge difference other than, I won't get into it. Anyways, I leave that flat. I do add a little bit of reverb to the snare drum. My reverb on that channel is at about probably 11 o'clock. Panning, like I mentioned, I never pan the snare drum, it's straight up center. Volume, I have quite a bit of snare in my mix as well, because it's, for me, one of the most foundational elements of a mix. X, I never do any EQing with. In fact, you can't hear anything because it's a bunch of stuff that never happens during a song. I never do any EQing. I never do any reverb, never do any panning, and then the volume I just put up to the level where it's a comfortable listening level. So that's where I do with that. Toms, this is, keep in mind, the toms and also the overhead mics. So we're hearing a lot of cymbals right now. I leave it pretty flat. Looks like I'm boosting the, well, I changed that earlier. I leave it flat for the most part, add a little bit of reverb. I don't pan it at all, and here's why. This toms mix is really probably 6 mics. You're getting 3 tom mics, a hi-hat mic, and then 2 overhead mics. And then what the sound engineer's doing for us is he's pre-panning all these things for us. He's sending us the overhead mics panned all the way to the sides, the tom mics kind of panned as if they're on the kit, and then the hi-hat mic maybe panned kind of over here. He's doing all of that for us so that if we just leave things centered, we're gonna hear all of those spread out around the mix. If I wanted to, I could put all of them more or less to one side or the other, but I don't think there's a need for that. Volume on that, I run, I don't know, around 1 o'clock, I guess. Bass guitar. I don't usually touch the high end, hardly at all. I'll cut some mid-range at around that frequency. Sometimes if it's too muddy, or if it's not thick enough, maybe I'll add a little bit, but I generally don't do a whole lot with it. Based on the bass player and just the sound of their bass, sometimes I will, I really never cut bass, but sometimes I'll add a little bit more low end. Some of that too just depends on your in-ears and how much low end that they naturally put out. So that bass, or that lows knob on a bass guitar can be really helpful. Okay, electric guitar. This is our lead electric. I do the same thing to the lead and the rhythm. EQ, I don't really do anything at all. Keep it pretty flat. On rare occasion, I'll cut a little bit of mid-range if it's just too muddy. Never any reverb because they're adding their own reverb on their pedal board. I don't need to add more. Panning, I'll usually pan them off halfway to one side. So here's center, here's a hard pan all the way to one side. I'll usually put them halfway in between. And then on my rhythm electric player, which today is in D, I'll put them off to the other side. So I've kind of got my lead over here maybe, I've got my rhythm over here, or vice versa. But essentially, they're complementary tones. So if I separate them kind of halfway, I can hear each one a little bit better. Let's jump over to acoustic guitar. Whoops. Okay. This depends on the sound of the guitar. If it's too dull, I'll add some brightness to it. If it's too muddy, I might cut a little bit of mids. I never do anything to the lows. A little bit of reverb, looks like 10 o'clock, 10:30. I might pan it a little bit, kind of opposite of the piano. So I'm panning like +1 to the right. If you look over at my piano, I'm panning +1 to the left. I kind of view those as complementary sources as well. Nothing extreme with panning, just basic. I'll have the volume of the acoustic louder if I'm playing the acoustic and I need to hear more of it. Otherwise, I kind of just want to hear enough of it to know that it's there on sections where the acoustic is playing without much other instrumentation happening. Last channel on our top layer is our keys. I don't do much to this with the EQ. I keep it pretty flat. No high or lows boost, and then the mids. I'll usually cut just like a notch of mid-range just to clean up some mud a little bit. Never any reverb, never any panning, just keep it centered, and then enough of it that I can hear it in moments when it's playing by itself, but it never cuts through unless I'm playing keys myself, and then I'll turn it up louder. Jump down to the bottom row. Piano. So I'll do different things based on if it's a grand piano on stage or if it's a Nord, like a soft synth piano. If it's the Nord, I don't find the need to do as much EQ. I'm gonna put these more flat actually. Now we're back to flat, no reverb. To me, that sounds pretty good on its own. I will probably turn the highs up a little bit and cut the mid-range a little bit. I mentioned the panning already. I'll maybe pan it very slightly to the opposite of the acoustic. I'm not gonna do anything to the lows. And then I like the volume around like noon. That's the piano for me. Vocals, these are gonna be the next 4 channels, lead, A, B, and C for how we've got things this particular Sunday. I do the same type of thing to each of these channels, so I won't walk through all of them. I'll let you hear one of them. Let's let you listen to Jill. She has a pretty voice. So I'm gonna turn the highs, as you can see on all 4 of these channels, to somewhere between like 230 to 330 to add some brightness. That's what sounds best for my in-ears. It may sound different for you, but that helps add some clarity into the signal. On the flip side, I'm gonna go down to the mid-range, mid-gain, and cut around anywhere. I'm gonna go back to between like 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, kind of depending on how muddy it sounds. The lows, I never touch on the vocal. Let's let you hear some of that. Here's a flat vocal sound. I'm gonna turn off the reverb too. So for me, that's a little bit dry, it's a little bit muddy, and it's hard to hear in the context of a mix. I don't hear as much of her as I'd like to. I don't want to just turn up the volume because that's just gonna boost everything. I'm gonna accentuate the parts I need to hear more of. There's kind of that vocal sibilance, the brightness, the airiness. Again, around like 2:30 or something. Cut some of the muddiness. Add the reverb to about probably 11 o'clock. You'll feel when you get too much. Sounds like it's in a cave. That to me sounds too dry. I like it around 11 o'clock or so. Let's talk about panning. This kind of depends on what role the vocalist is playing in the band. Mixing 101. If they're a lead vocalist in a song, they're always centered, along with what I said earlier: kick, snare, bass guitar. Always center if they're a lead vocalist. If they're singing only BGVs, I'm gonna pan them off kind of halfway to one side because I want to separate my BGVs a little bit. You can see here I've done this week with Haley and Abe. I've got Haley halfway off to one side, Abe halfway off to another. Here's kind of a caveat. Let's say we've got 5 vocalists, but we've also got an extra instrument in D. Maybe we have 2 vocalists that are together in C. The sound team's gonna pre-pan those for us so that vocalist 1 in C is already left and vocalist 2 is already right. In that case, I'll just leave my pan knob, usually centers, because they've already panned them for us. All right, a couple more channels to go. We've already talked about D, which is our rhythm electric guitar player. I do the same thing as I said with the lead. Really not much happening there besides a little bit of panning. Click track. I don't do anything on with EQ, no reverb, no panning, and I just have enough of it that I can hear it and stay in tempo. However, here's one tip. I'm gonna solo this. Let's say you're having a little bit of a hard time hearing click.
Turn
and
around.
You don't want to just keep turning
3,
it louder
4.
and louder and louder and louder. Maybe you'll try turning
4.
the high end up on it, which will just increase the brightness of the click some. That may help that cut through your mix a little bit more. Just kind of a quick tip that we've had success with from time to time. Last thing is tracks. I don't do anything with these as far as any EQ or reverb or panning, because the way that they're coming at us, they've already been EQ'd, they already have reverb on appropriate things, and they're already a stereo channel where things are already kind of panned around. So I just leave everything flat, meaning no EQ boost or cuts, no reverb. It's straight up center for my panning, and I'll put my volume in to kind of fill out this sound. I don't like to really notice them all the time, but if I took it away, it'd be something that I took away an element that's no longer there that kind of added another layer. So that's what I do with tracks. I think I hit everything. If you ever want to try out my mix, just ask the sound engineer. He can load that up for you. But my hope today was not that you could just copy my mix, but that you can take some of these principles and apply them to how you set your own mix and maybe find something that you love. So I hope that was helpful.